everyone remembers the long weekend. Not everyone remembers how they got home. The voicemail is still on my phone. I've played it for 4 people. 2 of them asked me to stop it before it finished.
Stop it!
I'm going to describe it in detail later, but I need to explain how I got it first. I'll go by Nate. I'm 32. Last Memorial Day weekend, my wife Lauren and I drove from Austin to a rental cabin on the Frio River in the Hill Country. If you're not from Texas, the Frio is this spring-fed river that cuts through limestone canyons about 2 hours west of San Antonio. It's a popular spot for tubing and swimming, especially on holiday weekends. The water is freezing cold even in summer, which is the whole appeal. The cabin we rented was upstream from the busy stretch, about 9 miles past the last gas station on a county road that turned to gravel after the first mile. The listing described it as private riverfront retreat. It was a 1-bedroom A-frame with a screened porch that overlooked a bend in the river. The property was surrounded by cedar and live oak on 3 sides, and the river was maybe 60 feet from the front door. There was no cell service. The listing mentioned that specifically, almost like a selling point. Disconnect and recharge. We thought that sounded perfect. We arrived Friday afternoon. The drive-in was beautiful. The road followed the river for the last few miles, and you could see the water through the trees. This pale green ribbon cutting through white limestone. The cabin was exactly as advertised. Clean, simple, isolated. The owner had left a binder on the kitchen counter with instructions for the water heater, the propane grill, and the generator. There was also a handwritten note that said, "River is low this time of year. Safe to wade, but watch for drop-offs past the bend. Enjoy your stay." We unpacked, swam in the river, grilled burgers, and watched the sun go down from the porch. The canyon walls turned orange, then purple, then black. By 9 p.m., the darkness was total. No light pollution, no sound except the river and the insects. Lauren fell asleep on the porch swing, and I carried her inside. I stayed up a little longer, sitting on the porch with a beer, just listening to the water. That's when I heard the phone ring. It came from inside the cabin, a landline ring. That old mechanical bell sound. I went inside and found it on the kitchen wall. A beige rotary phone I hadn't noticed before. It was mounted next to the refrigerator, partially hidden by a hanging dish towel. I hadn't seen it during our walkthrough, but I also hadn't been looking. The ring was loud and sharp in the quiet cabin. I picked it up. There was a pause. Then a woman's voice said,
"Are you at the cabin?"
"Are you at the cabin?" I said yes, assuming it was the property owner checking in. The voice was calm, middle-aged,
Good.
with a slight accent I couldn't place. She said, "Good. I need you to do something for me. Go to the river. Stand at the edge. Look downstream past the bend. Tell me what you see." I laughed a little, thinking it was some kind of quirky local thing. Maybe a game the owner played with guests. I said, "It's pitch black out there. I can't see anything." She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "You will." And the line went dead. I hung up and stood there for a minute, feeling weird about it. I checked the phone for a dial tone. Nothing. I picked it up again and held it to my ear. Dead silence. I traced the cord from the phone down the wall and behind the refrigerator. It wasn't plugged into anything. The cord ended in a bare copper wire that wasn't connected to a jack or a wall plate. It just dangled there behind the fridge, touching nothing. I pulled the phone off the wall and looked at the back of it. There was no battery compartment, no electronics. It was a mechanical rotary phone with no power source and no connection to anything, and it had just rung, and I had just had a conversation on it. I woke Lauren up and told her. She was groggy and annoyed and told me I'd probably been half asleep and dreamed it. I showed her the phone cord. She looked at it, shrugged, and said the owner probably had it disconnected and I'd imagined the call. She went back to sleep. I put the phone back on the wall and went to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about what the woman said. Go to the river, look downstream, past the bend. The next morning, Saturday, I did exactly that. Not because I believed anything supernatural had happened, but because I was curious. I walked down to the river's edge and looked downstream past the bend. The river curved to the left about 100 yards from the cabin, and beyond the bend, the canyon narrowed significantly. The walls rose maybe 40 feet on each side, and the water disappeared into shadow. From where I was standing, I could see maybe 200 feet past the bend before the canyon swallowed everything. There was nothing unusual, just river, rock, and trees. I felt stupid for even checking. We spent Saturday the way you're supposed to spend a holiday weekend. We swam, we hiked a short trail along the canyon rim, we read on the porch. The phone didn't ring. I started to genuinely believe I'd imagined the whole thing. Lauren and I joked about it over dinner. The ghost wants you to look at the river. It felt like nothing. Saturday night, I woke up at 3:11 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my watch immediately. Something had woken me, but I didn't know what. Lauren was asleep next to me. The cabin was dark and quiet. I lay there for maybe 30 seconds, listening, and then I heard it. The river sounded wrong. I don't know how to explain this in a way that makes sense, but the sound of the water had changed. All day, the river had this constant, gentle rushing sound, the kind of white noise that puts you to sleep. But now it was different. The pitch was lower. The rhythm was off. It sounded like the water was moving in the wrong direction, or like something very large was displacing it. There was a heaviness to the sound that hadn't been there before, like the river itself had thickened. I got out of bed and went to the porch. The darkness outside was absolute. I couldn't see the river, but I could hear it, and it was definitely different. Heavier, slower, wrong. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter and walked down to the water's edge. I pointed the beam at the river. The water was black, not dark because of the night, black. The limestone riverbed, which had been clearly visible through the pale green water all day, was gone. The water was opaque, like ink, and it was moving slowly, much slower than it should have been given the gradient of the canyon. I swept the flashlight downstream, past the bend. The beam reached maybe 80 feet before the canyon walls absorbed it. But in those 80 feet, I saw something that I will never be able to unsee. The surface of the water was covered in handprints, not prints pressed into mud or stone. Handprints on the surface of the water itself. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, pressed upward from below, creating shallow depressions in the black water that held their shape for a second before the current slowly erased them. They were appearing in clusters, 5 or 6 at a time, all over the visible surface, as if dozens of hands were pressing against the underside of the water from below, trying to push through. I watched one form directly in front of me, no more than 10 feet away. The water dimpled inward, and I could see the shape of 4 fingers and a thumb perfectly defined, pressing up from underneath. It held for maybe 2 seconds. Then it smoothed out and was gone. Another one appeared 3 feet to the left. Then 2 more further downstream. The flashlight started flickering. I smacked it against my palm and it steadied, but the beam was weaker. In the diminished light, I noticed something else. The handprints weren't random. They were moving downstream, past the bend, in a pattern. They were migrating, like a school of fish, all pressing upward and then releasing, pressing and releasing, flowing around the bend and into the narrow canyon where I couldn't see. The phone rang. I heard it from inside the cabin. That same mechanical bell cutting through the sound of the river. I ran inside and grabbed it off the wall. The same woman's voice. Calm, patient. She said, "Did you look?"
Did you look?
I couldn't speak. My mouth was open, but nothing came out. She waited. Then she said, "They've been under there for a very long time. The river keeps them, but on the long weekends, when the water drops, they get closer to the surface. They can almost reach. I said, Who are you? My voice was shaking. She said, I'm the one who used to live in your cabin. I'm the one who found out what's in the river. And I'm the one who's calling to tell you not to go past the bend, no matter what you hear tonight, no matter what it sounds like. Do not go past the bend. The line went dead. I put the phone down and turned around. Lauren was standing in the bedroom doorway, awake, staring at me. She said, Who were you talking to? I told her we were leaving. She didn't argue. Something in my face must have told her everything she needed to know. We packed the car in under 10 minutes. I didn't go back to the river. I didn't look at the water. But as I was loading the last bag into the trunk, I heard something from downstream, past the bend, deep in the narrow canyon. It was a sound I hope I never hear again. It was wet and rhythmic, and it sounded like dozens of palms slapping the surface of the water in unison. Not splashing, slapping. Like hands trying to clap through a membrane they couldn't quite break. We drove out of there at 3:45 a.m. on a gravel road with no headlights for the first quarter mile, because I was too panicked to remember to turn them on. We didn't stop until we hit the gas station 9 miles away. I sat in the parking lot with the engine running and my hands locked on the steering wheel until the sun came up. Here's the part I mentioned at the beginning. When we got home to Austin, I checked my phone. I had a voicemail. It had been left at 3:12 a.m., 1 minute after I woke up, while I was still in bed before I even went to the porch. The voicemail was from my own number. My phone had no service out there. It's physically impossible for my phone to have called itself with no signal. The voicemail is 47 seconds long. For the first 30 seconds, it's just the sound of running water. But it's that wrong water. The heavy, slow, black-sounding water from that night. And in the last 17 seconds, underneath the water, you can hear voices, not words. Just voices, dozens of them. Overlapping, murmuring, like a crowd trying to speak through a wall. And right at the very end, one voice separates from the rest. It's clear. It's a man. And he says my name, my full name. First and last. A name I never gave to anyone out there. The voicemail is still on my phone. I will never delete it. Not because I want to keep it, but because I'm afraid of what happens if I do. I need to tell this carefully because I still work in this field and I don't want to compromise the investigation. I'll change some details, but the core of what happened is exactly as it occurred. I'll go by Ray. I'm 38. I'm a county coroner's investigator in a rural county in Missouri. My job is to respond to death scenes, document the circumstances, and determine whether the manner of death warrants an autopsy. I've been doing this for 11 years. I've seen car accidents, suicides, overdoses, decomposed remains, drownings, farm equipment accidents, and everything in between. I'm not easily disturbed. That's not a boast. It's a job requirement. Last Memorial Day weekend, I was on call. Holiday weekends are always busy for us. More people on the roads, more people on the water, more people drinking. I expected to get called out at least once. What I didn't expect was the call I got at 6:14 a.m. on Sunday morning. A turkey hunter had found a body in a creek bed on state conservation land about 20 miles south of town. The hunter had been walking a ridgeline at dawn when he looked down into a hollow and saw what he initially thought was a mannequin lying face up in the shallow water. He climbed down to check and realized it was a person. He called 911 from his truck. I arrived on scene around 7:30. 2 deputies were already there, along with the hunter, who was sitting on his tailgate looking like he'd aged 10 years. The conservation land was heavily wooded, mostly oak and hickory, with steep ravines cutting through limestone. The creek bed was at the bottom of a narrow hollow, maybe 15 feet wide, with walls that rose about 25 feet on each side. Getting down there required a rope. The deputies had already secured the scene, but hadn't approached the body. They were waiting for me. One of them, a guy named Holt, who I'd worked with for years, met me at the top of the ravine. He looked rattled, which was unusual for him. He said, "I need to tell you something before you go down there." I told him to go ahead. He said, "The body is wrong." I asked him what he meant. He said he couldn't explain it. He said I needed to see it myself. I rappelled down into the hollow with my kit. The creek was barely flowing. Maybe 2 inches of water moving over flat limestone. The body was lying in the center of the creek bed, face up, about 40 feet from where I descended. As I approached, the first thing I noticed was that the body was a male, probably mid-50s, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, no shoes. His eyes were closed. His arms were at his sides. He looked peaceful, almost like he was sleeping. The second thing I noticed was that he was clean, immaculately clean. His clothes had no mud, no debris, no water staining. His skin was pale, but unblemished. His hair was dry and neatly combed. He was lying in a creek bed in the middle of the woods, and he looked like he just stepped out of a shower and laid down. That was unusual, but not impossible. Sometimes bodies end up in strange conditions. I started my documentation. I photographed the scene from multiple angles, noted the position of the body relative to the creek and the ravine walls, and began my external examination. That's when I found the first thing I couldn't explain. His fingernails were gone. All 10 of them. Not broken or torn. Gone. The nail beds were smooth and healed over, as if the nails had been removed a long time ago and the skin had grown back. There was no scarring, no sign of trauma. The nail beds were just smooth pink skin, like he'd been born without them. I noted it and kept going. I checked his pockets. Empty. No wallet, no phone, no keys, nothing. I checked for tattoos or identifying marks. None. I checked his teeth. They were all present and in good condition, but there was something off about them that took me a moment to identify. They were perfectly uniform. Every tooth was the same size and shape. No variation between incisors and canines and molars. They were all identical. Smooth, white, and rounded, like a row of pebbles. I stopped and sat back on my heels. I had examined hundreds of bodies. I'd never seen anything like this. The teeth alone were enough to make me question whether I was looking at a real person, but the skin was real. The weight was real. The body temperature, when I checked it, was consistent with someone who had been dead for approximately 8 to 12 hours. Everything about him was biologically human, except for the details that weren't. I called Holt on the radio and told him I needed the medical examiner on scene. He said he'd already requested one. Then he asked me if I'd noticed the ground. I looked down. The limestone beneath the body was dry. Not damp, not wet, dry. The creek water was flowing on either side of him, but directly beneath his body, in a perfect outline matching his shape, the stone was completely dry. The water was flowing around him, not under him, as if something was repelling it. I watched a leaf drift downstream and hit the edge of the dry zone. It stopped, quivered for a second, and then slid around the perimeter and continued downstream on the other side. The water would not touch him. I stood up and took 3 steps back. I'm a scientist by training. I deal in observable facts. But I was looking at a body that water refused to touch, with no fingernails, identical teeth, and no identification, lying in a creek bed in the middle of nowhere, and I had no framework for any of it. The medical examiner arrived around 10 a.m. Dr. Lena Vasquez, someone I'd worked with for years and trusted completely. She did her own examination, and I watched her face go through the same progression mine had. Confusion, then focus, then something closer to unease. She didn't say much. She took samples, made notes, and called for transport.
Scene secure, requesting transport, toke site 42.
Before they moved the
What's your
body,
initial
I asked
impression?
her for her initial impression. She was quiet for a long time.
His organs are in
Then
the
she
wrong
said,
places.
his organs are in the wrong places. I asked her what she meant.
What do you mean?
She said she'd done a preliminary palpation of the abdomen and chest. The liver was on the left side. The heart was on the right. The spleen was central. She said it wasn't situs inversus, which is a known condition where organs are mirrored. She said the organs were just wrong, randomly rearranged, as if someone had taken them out and put them back in the wrong order. She said she'd need the autopsy to confirm, but she was certain enough to tell me on scene. She also told me something she said she'd never encountered in 22 years of practice. The body had no blood, not low blood, no blood. The vascular system was empty. Every vein, every artery, every capillary was dry. There was no blood anywhere in the body, and there was no wound, no puncture, no incision, and no external mechanism by which blood could have been removed. The body was transported to the regional morgue. The autopsy confirmed everything Dr. Vasquez had observed on scene. Organs rearranged in no recognizable pattern. Complete absence of blood with no point of extraction. No fingernails, identical teeth. And one additional finding that wasn't apparent in the field, the brain was present and structurally intact, but it was smooth. No folds, no sulci, no gyri. The surface of the brain was completely smooth, like a peeled egg. Dr. Vasquez said she'd never seen or read about anything like it in any medical literature. The body never identified. Fingerprints were impossible without nails. Dental records were useless because the teeth didn't match any human dental pattern. DNA was submitted to every available database. No matches. No missing person report in any jurisdiction matched the physical description. He simply didn't exist in any system. The case is still open. It's classified as an unidentified decedent with undetermined manner of death. I've spoken to Dr. Vasquez about it twice since the autopsy. The second time, she told me something that she said she debated whether to share with me. She said that during the autopsy, when she made the initial Y incision to open the chest cavity, body exhaled, not a postmortem gas release, which is common and which she's experienced thousands of times. She said the body took a single, slow, deliberate breath outward, and the air that came out was cold. She said it was at least 30 degrees colder than the room, and it smelled like wet limestone. She said she stepped back from the table and didn't touch the body again for 15 minutes. She said in 22 years, she had never stepped away from a table. She said she almost didn't finish the autopsy. I drive past the turnoff to that conservation land every week on my way to work. The hollow where we found him is about a quarter mile from the road, down a deer trail that most people would never notice. I've thought about going back. I've thought about walking down to that creek bed and checking whether the dry spot is still there, whether the water still flows around a shape that's no longer lying in it. I haven't gone, and I won't. Because the thing that haunts me most isn't the teeth or the organs or the empty veins. It's the fact that he was clean. Perfectly, impossibly clean. Lying in the woods, in a creek, with no shoes, and not a speck of dirt on him. Whatever put him there didn't drag him through the forest. It didn't carry him down the ravine. It placed him, gently, carefully, the way you'd place something you wanted someone to find. And I can't stop wondering what it was trying to show us. I'll use the name Jess. I'm 27. I'm an ER nurse at a level 2 trauma center in Colorado Springs. This happened last Memorial Day weekend, during a shift I will never forget. And not because of the trauma cases. Holiday weekends in the ER are chaos. You get every car accidents, ATV rollovers, falls, burns, alcohol poisoning, fights. Memorial Day is one of the worst because it's the first real outdoor weekend of the year and people go too hard too fast. I was working a 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift on Saturday night into Sunday morning. By 11 p.m., we were already at capacity. Every bed was full. The waiting room was standing room only. I was running between patients so fast I barely had time to chart. Around midnight, EMS brought in a woman, mid-30s, found unresponsive on a hiking trail in North Cheyenne Canyon Park by a couple walking their dog. No ID on her, no phone, no visible injuries. Vitals were stable, but she was completely unresponsive. Eyes open, pupils reactive, but she wasn't tracking, wasn't responding to voice or pain. GCS of 7. The paramedics said she'd been lying on the trail in a fetal position when they found her. The dog walkers said she wasn't there when they'd passed the same spot 40 minutes earlier. We got her into a bed, and I started my assessment. She was wearing hiking clothes, trail runners, leggings, and a long-sleeve tech shirt. No jacket. Which was odd because it was in the low 40s up in the canyon at night. Her clothes were damp, but not soaked. Her hands were ice cold. Her core temp was 95.2, which was mildly hypothermic, but not critical. The thing that caught my attention first was her expression. I've seen a lot of unresponsive patients. Usually their faces are slack, neutral, muscles relaxed. Her face wasn't relaxed. Her jaw was clenched. Not in a seizure pattern, just clenched. Like she was biting down on something with tremendous force. And her eyes, which were open and technically reactive, had this quality to them that I've never seen before or since. They were focused. Not on me, not on the ceiling. They were focused on a fixed point in space about 2 feet in front of her face. As if she was staring at something that was right there. Something only she could see. The attending physician, Dr. Mercer, ordered a full workup. CT head, tox screen, metabolic panel, the works. While we waited for results, I continued monitoring her. Her vitals stayed stable. Heart rate was 58, which was low but not alarming. Blood pressure was normal. Respirations were normal. She was physiologically fine. She just wasn't there. The CT came back clean. No bleed, no mass, no fracture, no swelling. Tox screen was negative. Metabolic panel was normal. There was no medical explanation for her condition. Dr. Mercer was puzzled. He consulted neurology, but the on-call neurologist couldn't come in until morning. We admitted her for observation, and I continued checking on her every 15 minutes. At 2:30 a.m., I walked into her room to do a vitals check, and she was sitting up. Not in the way a patient sits up when they wake from sleep. She was sitting perfectly upright in bed, spine straight, hands flat on the mattress at her sides, head facing directly forward. Her eyes were still open and still focused on that same invisible point, except now, the point had moved with her. It was still about 2 feet in front of her face. I said her name,
Megan?
which we tentatively identified from a missing hiker report that had come in an hour earlier. Megan? No response. I touched her shoulder. Her skin was warm now, which was good, but she didn't react to the contact. I checked her pupils. Still reactive. Still focused on nothing. I documented the position change and went to find Dr. Mercer. When we came back to the room 3 minutes later, she had moved again. She was now standing beside the bed. Same posture. Spine straight. Arms at her sides, head forward, eyes locked on that invisible point. She was standing on the cold tile floor in bare feet. Perfectly balanced. Perfectly still. Mercer approached her slowly. He said her name. Nothing. He shined a penlight in her eyes. Her pupils constricted, but she didn't blink. He gently took her wrist to check her pulse. The moment he touched her, she spoke. She said one word. Counting. Her voice was flat and dry, like she hadn't used it in days. Dr. Mercer asked her what she was counting. She didn't answer. He asked her again. Nothing. He asked her if she knew where she was. Nothing. She just stood there, staring at that fixed point in the air. We guided her back to bed. She didn't resist, but she didn't cooperate either. Her body moved where we directed it, but there was no volition behind it. It was like repositioning a mannequin that happened to be warm. Over the next 2 hours, I checked on her every 15 minutes as ordered. Each time, she was in a different position, sitting on the edge of the bed, standing by the window, sitting in the chair in the corner, standing in the center of the room. She never moved while I was watching. She only moved in the gaps between my checks, and every single time, she was in that same rigid posture, with her eyes locked on that same invisible point, which always remained exactly 2 feet in front of her face, regardless of which direction she was facing. At 4:15 a.m., I walked in and she was facing the wall. Not the window, not the door. The blank wall. And she was close to it, maybe 6 inches away, staring at the paint. I said her name. For the first time, she responded. Not by turning around, not by speaking. She raised her right hand and pressed her index finger against the wall. Then, she began to move it. She was writing something. I stepped closer. Her finger was tracing letters on the wall. There was nothing visible, no ink, no mark, but the motion was deliberate and precise. She was writing in cursive, her finger moving in smooth, practiced strokes. I watched her trace what looked like a word, then another, then another. She was writing a sentence, then she started a new line below it, then another. I stood there, watching her write on that wall for almost a full minute before I realized something that made my blood go cold. Her finger wasn't touching the wall. It was hovering about a 1/4 inch from the surface, and the paint beneath her fingertip was changing color. Wherever her finger passed, the white paint was darkening, turning a deep brownish red, as if the wall itself was bruising. The letters were appearing on the wall without her finger making contact. I took a step back. The words were becoming legible. They were names. She was writing names. First and last names, one after another, in neat cursive rows. I didn't recognize any of them. There were already about 15 names on the wall, and she was still writing. I ran to get Dr. Mercer. When we came back, she was lying in bed, eyes closed, apparently asleep. The wall was white, completely white. No marks, no discoloration, no names. I told Dr. Mercer what I'd seen. He looked at the wall, looked at me, and said he believed me, but that there was nothing there now. He suggested I take a break. I didn't argue. I went to the break room and sat down. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone and did something I probably shouldn't have done. I searched for one of the names I'd memorized from the wall. I'd managed to retain 3 of them because I'd been staring at them long enough for them to stick. First name returned no results. The second name returned no results. The third name, a woman's name that I'll keep private, returned a single result. It was an obituary from a newspaper in Pueblo, Colorado, dated 2019. The woman had died at age 41. Cause of death was listed as a hiking accident in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Her body was found on a trail after she'd been missing for 3 days. I searched the first 2 names again with different parameters. I found them both. Both were obituaries. Both were from Colorado. Both were hikers. One died in 2014 in the San Juan Mountains. The other died in 2021 near Crested Butte. All 3 deaths were ruled accidental. All 3 were found on trails. All 3 had been missing for multiple days before their bodies were recovered. I went back to Megan's room at 5:45 a.m. She was awake. Actually, awake. She was sitting up in bed, blinking, looking around the room with the confused expression of someone who doesn't know where they are. I asked her how she was feeling. She said she was cold and asked for water. Her voice was normal. Her eyes were normal. She was tracking, responding, present. Whatever had been wrong with her was gone. I asked her if she remembered what happened. She said she'd been hiking in the canyon around sunset. She said she'd stopped to rest on a rock And then she couldn't remember anything after that. She said it felt like she'd blinked and woken up in a hospital bed. She had no memory of being found, no memory of the ER, no memory of standing, moving, speaking, or writing. I didn't tell her about the names. I didn't tell her about the wall. I didn't tell her about any of it. She was discharged later that morning with a diagnosis of altered mental status of unknown etiology and a referral to neurology. I went home after my shift, and I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those names. I spent the next 3 days searching for every name I could remember from that wall. I'd retained 3 clearly, but there were fragments of others. Partial last names, first initials. I found 2 more matches. Both hikers, both dead, both in Colorado. Both found on trails after being missing. 5 names, 5 dead hikers. All from different years, different locations, different circumstances. The only thing connecting them was that they all died alone on trails in the Colorado mountains. And a woman who was found unresponsive on a trail wrote all of their names on a hospital wall without touching it. I've tried to find Megan since then. The contact information she gave at discharge doesn't work. The phone number is disconnected. The address doesn't exist. The name she gave us doesn't appear in any database I can access. The missing hiker report that matched her description was withdrawn the next day. I called the agency that filed it. They said they had no record of ever filing it. I still work at that hospital. I still take holiday weekend shifts. And every time I walk past that room, I look at the wall. It's been repainted since then, part of a routine refresh, but sometimes under the fluorescent lights, at certain angles, I think I can see the faintest discoloration beneath the new paint. Rows and rows of it. And I can't help but wonder how many names were on that wall that I didn't get to read, and whether mine will be on a wall somewhere, someday, written by a hand that isn't touching the surface, in a room where no one is really there.